Welcome, I'm Sally Treanor, and today we're going to continue the lesson with rocks, only today we're going to expand to boulders, and that'll be kind of interesting, I think. We're going to experiment a little bit with more of what we've been doing with the palette, and that I invite you to use different pigments. Let's just review what we have been using. It's burnt sienna, French ultramarine, and New Gamboge, I think, is what we've started with. So in moving on, we can replace that red with a number of reds, but one of the ones that I think is successful for this would be brown madder. I also like introducing, instead of the French ultramarine, go to another color that has a lot of staining ability, and not staining ability, but tinting ability, is the Winsor Blue Red shade. Also, another one that has the granulating possibility is the cerulean. So I give you freedom to do some of that experimentation. This exercise today, we're both going to use a bigger piece of paper, in other words, an 1/8 of a sheet rather than a 1/16. And we're going to work on dry paper, and I'm going to switch up the palette. What do I mean by working on boulders rather than rocks? Well, I'm going to make objects that are inherently larger, and I want them to appear larger. So we're going to have puddles, and this time we're going to go to the brown madder. Brown madder is a low intensity red, but it's brighter, quite a bit brighter than the burnt sienna, and I like it. And we're going to go to, let's go to cerulean, and we'll use Winsor Blue Red shade as a backup. And now let's use more Winsor Blue Red shade. I like the cerulean in there because it's granulating. This is going to be quite different because the red is so different. And let's use a low intensity yellow. Let's use raw sienna. Incidentally, I read the other day that burnt sienna is made with iron oxide that has been heated. Raw sienna also has iron oxide in it, but it's not heated. Therefore, you have burnt and raw. Notice I went first into my yellow, so I avoided adulterating it with my blue. Look at the green that gives us. It's really, really nice. And if we wanted to tone that down a little bit, we would just add red to it, the brown madder. Big rocks, boulders. So just to remember the difference, rocks and boulders. Boulders are bold into this. So big rock, bold. The only thing I'm paying attention to right now is the outer shape. And I'm going to keep enriching this puddle with all the colors. So I have different things happening with it. And usually rocks that are lying next to one another are made of the same material. This is a 1.5 inch flat. And it's really quite a nice brush. I've had it for years. It's so old that I have to keep using pliers to tighten the crimp of this barrel. So I'm just adding another shape, and I'm doing this as rapidly as I can because, again, my situation here is that it's got light shining on it, drying it out like crazy. And so let's go now with our round and start dropping in color, different colors. And remember, when you drop colors in, they have the tendency to move wet paint out of the way. And so this is going to add areas that are just green or green that's mingled with what's there.
Is there anything you could suggest in place of raw sienna? Would gamboge be okay?
It's not low intensity. You could use yellow ochre if you have that.
What about Naples yellow?
Nope.
Okay, well,
Very opaque and very light. I'm gonna just pick up a little more of the plain color to drop in, just for the interest it's going to give me. I'm not too interested in reality right now, as you can see. Not very rocky at the moment. I'm just using the individual pigment elements here to see what happens as I drop them in. Remember, at this point, you really just don't want to brush it on. You want to let it drop out of your brush and drop into the puddles where you've got lots of nice water. And I don't like upper part of this rock. So I'm gonna put some stuff in here, make something happen with that. Didn't write like,
How big is your round, Sally?
this is the one I almost always use. It's a golden fleece from Cheap Joe's, number 14. And let's just cover some of that place where they join. Okay, this is kind of hodgepodge of color right now. For this, when I start scraping, and it'll be just a minute, I'm going to use the credit card because I can get a lot of variety out of my stroke. Remember, when you use it with just the corner, you get kind of a narrow line, and the more you oppose, the wider the stroke. So corner, and this would be very wide, of course, but and this would be less wide, but pretty wide. I have to make the decision right now of which one of these boulders is in front. I'm thinking that this boulder is in front. So let's work on the one that's in the back. Try and have some dry paper that you can hold your boulder. So I'm using the whole narrow edge of my tool here. I'm getting some very rocky things happening, and we really aren't working too much with composition this time, although we are paying attention to not having too many of the same shapes. We want to make sure that our strokes are pretty big and that the planes are kind of interesting and big. Okay, going to clean off the card and come into the other boulder. And you can see now I'm using what is actually kind of a clumsy tool at this point because it's so wide, and yet it's letting me treat this as a larger object. And you know, when we were talking about using the scraping technique, that might be in other ways. Suppose you wanted to make a building in a forest. It quite often would be that you could accomplish that building with scraping as long as you did it in a timely way. So I can keep working this. It's going to lend itself to different planes. As you can see, these are masses that are quite different from the rocks that we've been doing. And so it kind of directs you to play a different game with your scraping tool. Another time you can use a different tool. This tool with this interesting edge is going to give you other options that are nice. The other thing you can do is some veins in those rocks by scraping in and scoring. I'm scoring with the edge of this tool now. These are not going to show up because there's not much pigment left, but they will show up on the next go round. I'll dry mine off in the meantime, and I'll demonstrate the second part of this. I'm going to dry this so that it is ready for me to come back in. Incidentally, I've got an accidental piece of color that's gone up into the sky where I do not want it. And mind you, even though these are staining, or the blue is anyway, staining color, I can still move that around to the point where it sort of disappears. And again, let me just remind you that in my experimentation, I prefer to use the bristle brushes when I'm erasing. I could be very gentle with them, so I'm not disturbing the surface very much. And I find that I'm too heavy-handed to use the Mr. Clean originals.
I don't get much of an effect scraping with a credit card. Why?
It might not be wet enough. You know, that's why I like you to use paint that has become more viscous, because the puddle has a higher concentration, a higher saturation of pigment to water. It gets to that kind of gluey point more rapidly, so you can move it around and not worry about it drying out too fast. You have to have available paint, and to be available, it has to be wet, but not sopping wet. Sopping wet, it'll just bleed back in and your marks won't be crisp.
Can you re-wet the rocks to do more scraping, or do you have to apply more paint to do more scraping?
Yes and yes. You can't simply wet them because you're not going to rehydrate that paint. You will a little bit, but not really. So you have to come back in with more paint, and that's what you move around. And you want to move it around in such a way that it doesn't disturb what's already there, because you've worked very hard to get some of the effects that you've already got. You don't just wet everything again. You just went wet area by area. I'm going to just come in with my round because I'm going to be wetting discreetly. And I'm going to come in with some of this really nice brown matter that I'm going to gray a little bit with a little bit of blue. I'm going to accentuate this part of the rock. And so I'm going to use another technique, and I have one edge that's hard edged and one edge that I'm losing. Okay, so I've just come in with some nice red tone, and I'm going to take some of my mostly blue puddle here, re-wet it, and I'm going to blot, and I'm going to drop in some of that to play games with it and make it do things. And then, now that I have available pigment again, I'm going to score to emphasize some of the stuff that's happening here. And I'm going to produce with my stylus areas that are like fissures in a real rock. I don't know if you can appreciate what I just did. So you can see what I did on that rock behind the rock. So in some ways, I'm doing some negative painting there. That's the kind of thing I mean by area. You're going to go through and find places where you want to emphasize the structure of the planes of this particular boulder. So let's do it again. I'm going to come in and lose that edge. It's always important to get rid of anything. You can always come back and correct what you do. But if it dries and you end up having something there that you don't want, you have to go back and correct it. Whereas if you just want to add to it, if you've got it wet beyond the perimeter of what you put in, then you always have the chance to do interesting things for a while. And I'm going to score. And again, I've changed the game by losing the edge, letting things flow. You have a hard edge to define one part of something, like right here. That's the hard edge. And you lose the edge opposite that. It seems logical to me now after years and years of doing this and making those decisions on the fly, but I don't think it was natural to me when I started doing this. So negative painting is something that you have to train yourself to see that way. Now I've created something that I don't like right now. I don't like this very light area here, but you see how it stands out now? Can't work on it right now because the things on both sides of it are wet. But what I would do, I would come in and probably just gently wet this, just gently. I would blot my brush before I come in to wet it. And then just drop in some color there so that there's a shadow there. So you'd have like an undulation in the top of the boulder. These are, if you'll pardon the expression, after doing two classes on rocks, they're just stepping stones. They translate into other objects, and they should become so intuitive to you that you can draw them up at will to use them where you want them. Okay, that's it for today, guys.